to today. So I think the context for today is, as we know, in many of our smaller and mid-sized cities and towns, there are brownfield sites that have the potential to contribute to the local economy, whether it's as housing or whether it's as commercial or workspace or other amenities, or indeed all of those things altogether. But we also know, for a variety of different reasons, some of those sites are often complicated, and without additional or specific public sector support, whether that's cash or whether that's policy, regulation, or indeed capacity, those sites are unlikely or less likely to be developed, or at least at the pace that we would ideally want them to do. So we're going to explore these aspects today, what it is like to actually do brownfield regeneration in our smaller and mid-sized places, and what we can learn from that, and what policy should be thinking about, or what the new Labour government should be thinking about when it gets to these sorts of policy questions. And we've got a brilliant expert panel that are actually doing brownfield regeneration in precisely those sorts of places. We've got Peter McIntyre, who's Director of City Development at Sunderland City Council, Kate Ingram, who's Director of Economy and Development at Burnley City Council, and we've got Phil Mayall, who's Managing Director of Muse. As I say, all of them are doing these things and grappling with these issues and making progress on these sorts of issues. So we thought we'd just have a conversation about that. We're going to try and do it in two parts. The first part really is hearing from our panelists about what's going on in their patch and their experiences. You know, how are they going about it? Why are they doing what they're doing? And then from that, what are the lessons? And that's really for part two, where we can think about what those lessons and experience tell us about what we should want from national government or our combined authorities in some big areas. How do they support brownfield regeneration in smaller and mid-sized towns and cities? So that's really what we're going to try and do over the next hour. As always, we have the Q&A function, which you can post your comments, queries, and questions. I'll keep an eye on it throughout and try to weave them into the conversation that we're about to have. But Kate, let's come to you first. You're leading the way in Burnley in thinking about how you rejuvenate, regenerate the town centre and different aspects of that. Just say about what you're up to, why you're doing what you're doing, and then we'll come back and get some of the lessons from you. So Kate, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. I think, you know, as a local authority, I guess it starts, you know, with our role as a planning authority. And, you know, we have taken very much a brownfield first approach. So when we did our last local plan, that was the approach we took. You know, what can we deliver in terms of housing, commercial development, mixed use developments on our brownfield sites, for a number of reasons. You know, we don't want to dig up greenfields unless we have to. A lot of those brownfield sites are actually in good locations strategically. They're close to existing road networks, rail networks. So from a sort of sustainability transport point of view, it makes a lot of sense to deliver those sites. And also the blight that some of those sites have on neighbourhoods, on our town. You know, we really needed to do something. So there's been a real imperative around dealing with those sites, and just as a range of the things we've been doing, you know, over the last 10 years, we've turned a large former chemical works into a brand new business park next to the motorway, really successful. We turned a former tyre factory into an advanced manufacturing park, you know, and that was about, you know, how do we use the assets that are there, that were locked up there, to regenerate the jobs, the manufacturing jobs that were once on that site, and reinvent it, reimagine it for a different sector and for the future. And probably my favourite project, and probably the most complex one, has been the Weavers Triangle and the canal side redevelopment. Which is turning into a bit of a life work, hugely complex but beautiful area, conservation area, lots of old listed mills, cleared sites, which is now anchored by the University of Central Lancashire. So actually, you know, we've taken from a development approach this approach of, getting an anchor institution in the university, in the town, the direct jobs that it creates, the spin outs, the wider economic benefits and business benefits, and actually the benefits of having 4,000 or 5,000 students in our town spending money and spending their time here. And in terms of thinking about what we've learned from that, brownfield sites, as you say, are by their nature, they're difficult. You're dealing with contamination. You never know quite what's going to pop out in the ground, quite often constrained by what's around them as well. And I think really one of the big challenges for smaller sized places outside of the big cities is viability, making them stack up, dealing with those constraints and difficulties in an environment where your end values might not be particularly good. So that is, but I think the takeaways that I've had from this is about, and I would say this because I'm a planner, about that supportive local planning framework, and I think we've got the balance right there. But you have to have a coalition of the willing. And I think where we've made these sites work is where the site's either been owned by a developer who has been willing to work with us as a public authority, to take our time to get over all of the hurdles, deal with things like, the Highways Agency and those difficult things. And also we've been able to bring to the table and help them get the gap funding that they needed to bring forward sites. And I think where we haven't had a willing developer and where we've been successful, and the Weavers Triangle is one of those, is where we've been able to get ownership of that land. We've then been able to take a strategic approach to how we plan that out. We've been able to pick a developer who is willing to roll up their sleeves and work with us over a long term on what's been, quite difficult project to make work, and also how we've brought other people around the table when we've needed to. So I think for me, those real lessons are around leveraging relationships, taking you're in it for the long term when you're dealing with these kind of sites, and particularly if it's not just a single site but probably quite often a series of sites and networks. I think going forwards, I can see a number of sites, brownfield sites in our town that we'd like to take forwards. For me, ownership of those is going to be key to making them happen.
Brilliant. Well, we'll come back to that, the sort of questions around them, ownership, which we've heard a little bit from the government or the new government as to they may, makes some of that a little bit easier. Before I just turn to Peter, okay, because I'm sure Phil will say this as well. Just give us a sense as to where does the proactivity, the perspective that Burnley has in terms of how it thinks about, regenerating its place, thinking about the brownfield approach, but also, the schemes like the Upland scheme. Where does that come from? Is that political leadership? Has it been there, for a long time? I mean, how does that play out? Give us a sense.
I think it comes from both, and we've like lots of councils, we've had lots of different political leaderships over a period of time. Particularly the last few years, we've had changes, but it's all about sort of driving prosperity, driving growth, bringing new jobs, bringing aspiration to people in our towns. And I think, making people feel good about the town. I mean, there was nothing worse than driving into town, and I have done for a long time, past those mills that were in an absolute state of repair. And, it's kind of uplifting coming past them now. I think it raises people's heads, it raises people's aspirations. It makes businesses feel better about their place. And, I can think of one business, and if they had a visitor, they used to go on a very long detour out of town, through the countryside and down a particular street so that they didn't have to drive past these derelict mills.
I suppose it's that, or either just arrange all your meetings for either very early in the morning when it's dark,
Yeah,
or
when
very
it's
late at
dark.
night when it's dark.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah, maybe the
it's
longer route
important
is.
about people's perceptions that
Yeah, no,
we.
God, yeah, that is a very
It's
good point.
about placemaking. I think placemaking is the word
Yeah,
that I was looking for as much
yeah.
as anything.
Okay, let's turn to Peter. Talk to us a little bit about sort of Sunderland's story. Obviously, the Riverside is a very big scheme, both sides of the river coming through into the city centre, connecting both banks. You've also got the Crownwork Studios now, which is kind of, in its early stages, but nevertheless making some progress. So just give us paint a picture of what's going on in Sunderland, and like Kate, the sort of things that you've done and why you've done them and some of the lessons you've learned.
Sure, Andrew, and of course we've walked that walk that Kate describes there. I think we're in similar situations, and lucky to have sort of passionate people around us that push a lot of this this regeneration forward. I think in Sunderland, I mean, I often describe Sunderland as the UK's best example of suburbanisation, in that the local authority had effectively dismissed its core and was very focused on those greenfield sites, Kate. So pushing the city ever wider, while wanting to do things with its city centre, but actually not having the wherewithal to really take on those complicated sites. I mean, that was compounded really by the fact that the industrial nature of Sunderland meant that all of its industry was in the city centre, and when that industry effectively disappeared in the 1980s, all of those sites were left derelict, and there was a willingness to do it. There was certainly a willingness to master plan the living daylights out of them, because there's, in my former headquarters, I'm sure there was a room in there that had nothing but millions and millions of master plans in it. So, the council sort of, it backed a lot of thinking, but very, very little doing. Its reaction to really trying to get the city centre away, where the majority of our brownfield sites still remain, was really to sort of excuse itself from the responsibility and to set up arm's length vehicles. And when those arm's length vehicles told it that things that it didn't like, it wanted to get rid of those arm's length vehicles. So it spent a lot of its time going in a sort of distressful circle and not really doing very much. So we drew a line under that about 6 years ago, when there was a change in leadership, a change in chief executive. I was brought into Sunderland to sort of look at these issues, and the first thing that stands out with Sunderland is that less than 1% of its population is actually in the city centre. So there's a danger there, but there's also a huge opportunity if you can begin to sort of fold that activity back into the centre. And our reaction to that problem was really what we call Riverside Sunderland, which now does contain the new Crownwork Studios, because we're very pragmatic in Sunderland, and our red lines to move around to make sure that what needs to happen happens. So Riverside is about £1.5 billion worth of GDV. We've either recently finished or we've contracted about 680 million. So Sunderland's a very, very busy place now. I mean, there's umpteen contracts happening right now, so it's quite an elaborate management exercise that we're going through at the moment, just to make sure that all of that activity doesn't diminish the city centre's ability to actually function. But there's lots of cranes on the horizon, lots of that positivity and good feeling that Kate was talking about. I mean, we used to meet people in Newcastle, Kate. We didn't bring them into the city at all. So, we didn't even wait for it to be dark. So, but now we've invested heavily in a new headquarters. We've partnered with institutions such as Legal and General and Canada Life. So there's a lot of examples of development either underway or have recently happened that has effectively made the people in the city and in the city council believe. Importantly, you mentioned the sort of, your planning background. I mean, not only did we effectively have a new investment strategy for the city centre, that was backed by an area action plan to ensure that planning framework was solid. I must admit, before we did any of this, nearly 2 years, we were really getting a lot of stick for not doing very much at all. But what we were doing was we were buying tens of acres and hundreds of properties very quietly, so that that development platform was actually achievable once that planning strategy was known. And I think that, you know, as well as having a very supportive local authority mechanism, nothing happens really these days unless you've got some traction over landholding. And, you know, no doubt we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I mean, we spent a lot of time in the City of London trying to explain where Sunderland was. And what we found very quickly was that, you know, those institutions who may wish to invest couldn't really see what Sunderland's investment proposition was. You know, so we had to sort of declutter a lot of that ambition and stop wanting to back hundreds of projects and just say, look, you know, here's something that'll make you the return as per your investment board's criteria. Come on side and lend a hand on what we're calling sort of Riverside, which is one big priority, even though it's got hundreds of projects in it. So all of that ended up being, you know, principally developed by the council, I would say. You know, we had to totally restructure our council. We looked at ourselves and we said, well, this isn't really fit for purpose. And city development as a directorate really contains all of those people within the local authority that have got anything whatsoever to say or influence on development and investment. So they all work to one plan, to one management structure. And to date, you know, it's working really well. I mean, our ambition in the urban core is always to get planning applications through within 13 weeks. You know, we don't take much longer than that unless it's engaging with the ever increasing amount of third-party consultees that the government keeps throwing at us, you know, which tends to slow things down. But, you know, we like to think that not only are we a good regulator, we're a good investor developer. And we do have within the council our own development management function. People who have never worked for a local authority before were convinced that, you know, the plans that we had were somewhere where they wanted to apply their profession. And so far they're still with us. So, you know, we can effectively take some of those elements out of the appraisal and contain that within the council, which, you know, as Kate said earlier, is really all about speaking to the viability of a lot of this product that you want to put on these brownfield sites. I mean, what we're finding, the Sunderland story is that land conditions are incredibly poor. We have a site that's on fire at the moment. You know, it'll go out before anyone's living on it. But, you know, there are ground conditions that need to be dealt with. The cost of development, especially over the last 2 years, you know, has gone way beyond what appraisals can stand. And we've got an ever decreasing tier one contractor base in the northeast of England and an ever decreasing skills sort of pool to go fishing in to do some of these things that we want to do. And we're also finding that as these costs increase and, you know, that actually return on sales and return on rents are pretty static. So everything's becoming more expensive and the gap in that appraisal is getting worse.
Yeah.
And Andrew, that is compounded with the fact that money is just still far too expensive to do regeneration. You know, if you're a debt-based organisation, which most local authorities are, but borrowing at nearly 6% isn't getting the job done. You know, our appraisals work when debt is at 3.25%. And, you know, until we get back down there, gap funding mechanisms need to step in. But, you know, it's not all doom and gloom. You know, if people come to Sunderland, you will see a lot of activity. We were very lucky. We got a lot of things going while the going was good. And we're already planning out projects which, you know, we won't be opening the doors until 2028.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. It's a great oversight, Peter, just both in terms of what you're doing, but I guess, you know, some of the sort of changing ethos or approach that the council itself has taken, similar to what, you know, Kate was saying in terms of just having city development, having town development has been, you know, an integral and important thing that the council is meant to be doing or wants to do, and then thinking about how it deploys and organises its resources to do that. I'll definitely come back to you and get some more thoughts from you and Kate on that. Phil, let's just hear from you in first round. I mean, Muse, you know, you're doing stuff all, you know, in lots of different places: Blackpool, Salford, Birkenhead, Rotherham, Plymouth, Wakefield. I could I could name many, many more. You're also doing stuff in big places and all the rest of it. So you just give us your, again, your sort of overview and insight when you're trying to do stuff in some of those, some of the smaller and medium-sized places. What's your experience? What have you been doing? Why are you doing what you're doing? What have you found?
Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. I think maybe if I kind of break it down into three components, coming at it, if you like, from the other side of the fence, but I'm quickly going to remove that fence because nothing we do is on our own. It's in partnership. But if I kind of break it down into selection, where do we like to work?
Yeah.
Why? Place. So once you've chosen the partner, what is it you look for in the place? And then delivery. And delivery is probably where some of Peter's, not all doom and gloom, but some of it is where that'll probably come out of that part of that component. But in terms of selection, I think why do I use the term selection? Because there's an overarching need up and down the country for regeneration. We know that our places are changing. They're changing structurally. They're changing again for some of the reasons both Peter and Kate have outlined, whether that's suburbanisation or deindustrialisation or a combination of the two over many, many years, and then structural changes in retail, provision, and everything else, and the way we work. We're going through that now. So we do. There's an overarching need for that up and down the country. And there's only so much as an organisation we can do. So we select our partners, and it's partner first, very carefully. So what do we look for in a partner? We look for somebody who is somebody, and I'm invariably looking in both Kate and Peter's direction in terms of local authority. They're very clear on what they want. We don't come and do things to places. We deliver what a place wants. We can add expertise, we can add opinion, we can bring tools and thoughts of how to achieve it, but we don't come and impose something. So there's a very clear idea of what the place wants. There's consistent leadership. Now that doesn't mean it's the same individual. Neither does it mean it's the same party. And we're working in Stockport at the moment, which commonly switches between Labour and Lib Dems in terms of leadership or no overall control. But a number of years ago, they took the view that they needed a cross-party consensus in terms of the regeneration of the town centre. So we can rely on that. We're not making investment decisions now, crossing fingers that at the next election cycle we're still going to be speaking with the same people with the same opinion. So you can plan for the long term, because we all know on this call, and I'm sure most people listening, if not all, that we're talking 10, 15, 20, 25 year propositions here. We're not talking single project propositions. These things join up, and Peter's point around moving red lines, exactly. If I walk out of this building here in Salford, I don't trip over a red line of a development agreement. Yeah. Places move and shift, and you need to respond, and things that happen 3 or 4 miles down the road will directly impact what you want to achieve. So consistency of leadership, policy, and I guess this is going to sound a bit odd, but a kind of community that is actually interested in it. There's no point, again, trying to impose something, and that really comes back to leadership, I guess. Yeah. It doesn't go top down. A community has said, look, enough's enough. We want the place to change. Now, there will be a number of different opinions within that, but there's generally a move towards change. So that's kind of the selection piece. Place. Look, it's a given that there's a need, or else we wouldn't be there. That's your kind of greenfield type stuff. Mm. If I can generalise, there's a defined need. Clearly, we need to get under the skin of what that need is. But actually, what is quite often missed in regeneration is most people tend to then dwell on that, on the issues that come with that need. Why do they need it? Oh God, oh God, it's in 5% deprived wards in the country, or there's a road there that's bringing people in, but it's a massive constraint. Oh God, the car crime, whatever it is. Actually, what you need to do is look at the strengths. So why did the place become the place it is? Whether it's the river I can see just behind Peter on the screen there, or is it frankly the passion of the people in both places? But I know Burnley a little bit better. The passion of the people in Burnley and a fondness for its heritage. What is it that made it great? Okay, and what is the still remaining of that? What is it we can work? Is it age of population? Is it a strong university or a university with ambition? Is it one or two big employers? Is it again in both places? Is it a football heritage? Is it I'll get a plug in for my sport. Is it rugby league heritage in other part of Northern Title? What is it that the RFL will be sending me £1 for that?
We're sports inclusive, but at Centre for Cities, Bill, as you know, we'll take any and all sports, treat them equally.
Indeed. So what is it, and can we build upon that? And are some of those constraints actual positives? If there's a road and it brings people in, can we calm it such that it becomes a positive, not seeing it as a black and white? So that's kind of the second piece. Then we get onto the difficult bit. None of this is easy. We all know this. None of this is easy. And to Kate's point, actually, I'd take Kate's point a little bit further. Actually, the vast majority of towns and cities, not just those outside the big four, are unviable. I'm sat in Salford. I'm 15 minutes walk from, if that, 10 minutes walk from Manchester Town Hall. I could draw a 10-minute radius from Manchester Town Hall. I can tell you most of that's unviable at the moment. So it's, look, we know that, but I'll take you back to the two previous points I made, because you need the confidence to develop the plans, which take time, money, passion, commitment, to source funding streams and investors that you don't know exist yet. Most of the projects we end up delivering, I can tell you, we had no idea what the funding source, or in some cases the use in build to rent and what have you, would be. But we took confidence from the first two pieces, and we took a long-term view and said, look, if we invest the money now we know that road needs adjusting, we know that that needs decontaminating, we know that will get us ready. That will get us ready, and we can articulate then to national, regional, and local government in terms of private sector partner what is needed, what the economic outcome will be. That's far better and puts you in a far better position than what we've been in the last few years. Sudden call for projects, something's lobbed in, you might get a decision on it quickly, but then you go, right, what are we going to do? And the money goes back, confidence gets undermined in the place and the leadership, and you continue a downward spiral on regeneration. So there's quite a lot in those three things, and there's quite a lot more to say on them, but those are the kinds of things we look at when we're delivering projects.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you for that, Phil. And all three of you said similar things, but certainly the issue around the leadership and the clarity of purpose, etc., comes through. I'm going to hold that one to the side for the minute. We'll maybe come back to that a little bit, but just wanted to take through some of the mechanics really that you've also talked about, and say a little bit about, expand on that, because you each touched on them, but it'd be a bit useful, both in terms of what you mean by that, but also, I guess, what we might suggest to policymakers that would make it marginally easier or significantly easier or better to do something. So just have these in your mind. I'll come to you first, Kate, but we're going to do ownership and acquiring ownership, land, buildings. Be interested in your thoughts on that. There's obviously the money question, which is the amount but also the type of money that's available, and get you to say something on that and the role it maybe could or should be playing. And then there's the capacity skills question, which is on all fronts within the sort of partnership, what might make that easier. So let's just take those in in turn and get each of you just say something about where you think we are, based on your experience, and what would make it better, easier, more efficient. Okay, so start with the ownership. You said something about ownership of land, ownership of buildings being an important part of your approach. Just say a little bit more about that, but then think about, I'm sure it's not been straightforward. What might make it marginally or significantly easier if we needed to go down, if more places need to go down that route, Kate?
Yeah, I mean, if I go back to the Sandygate Weavers Triangle project that we worked on, we were really fortunate. There we had a big slug of public money. It came from the NWDA at the time. No strings attached to it, unusually, other than some that we deliver something eventually, and there was a recognition that it was going to take a long time to do, rather than you bid for the money today and you've got to deliver it all in 2 years' time. So we had the money to buy those sites in. We had some money for holding costs and for an enabling costs as well, so that we could do all the things that we needed to do to go out to the market and plan the site and find a developer to work with us. So that was a really good approach, and we've demonstrated, I think, that when we've got that ownership, we can take things forwards. That red line of that project, as Phil says, needs moving, and we want to move it. But we've chipped away. We've brought in some other bits of sites that we'll take forward next. But there's lots of other sites, and they're in complex ownerships. People with very unrealistic valuations and ideas of what they want. I was with someone the other week and they said, "Oh, we sat on a gold mine." Really? And so I think we want to move forward, but for us to have the confidence to do that, and particularly bearing in mind that Burnley is actually only a small district authority, we don't have massive budgets. And when we do things, the degree of risk for us financially is probably greater than it is for a larger Met authority.
Of course.
So we do need some help with supporting those, with funding those acquisitions. I know there's been lots of talk nationally, and actually some actual changes that came out of the lower round CPO process. But it still needs to move a long way in terms of giving us certainty particularly over value. There's nothing worse for us than if we went and bought a CPO'd property and we ended up paying a lot more than was in our appraisals, and then the whole viability of it falls down.
Yeah.
We can't afford to pick up that bill, really. We just need some more certainty around that process,
and that's the purchasing price certainty.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been some changes, hasn't there, around the flexibility. You can apply for a direction, but it only applies to affordable homes and some sort of things like hospitals and schools and things. But if you want to do a mixed development, you want to do market housing, that isn't there for you, and it does need widening out to be bit wider, and some tweaks around how it will function as well, just again around certainty in process and what you're doing and going forwards.
That's helpful. Let me pause you there, and I'll come back to you on the touch a little bit. We'll come back on the money front as well. Peter, come in on this one. You talked a little bit about you've been quietly behind the scenes, acquiring bits of land and buildings, I suppose. Again, like Kate, not a straightforward process. People have different perspectives on what the land or the building is worth and how long they're prepared to hold out for it. I mean, just reflecting on that experience, what might we propose to make that process marginally easier, whilst respecting the different interests in the transaction, right? I mean,
I think if you've got a well constituted plan, and the plan has government support, so you're drawing in central government money, or increasingly in the northeast the combined authority money, then that plan needs to have powers. So 6 or 7 years ago, when we were establishing the platform that is now Riverside, people were quite willing to sell the land, really. I mean, there wasn't a lot of people digging in.
Yeah.
But then when you produce CGIs like the one behind me, it starts to get tougher and tougher. And I think we really, if we've got an agreed plan and, it's gone through a democratic process, then those CPO processes need to be decluttered. We need to be able to sort of draw down what is often speculative ownerships from people that bought stuff in the city who live in Ireland and it's just part of a spreadsheet and they're not even sure where they are. We need to transact quickly on that stuff.
Has the Brownfield registers stuff been helpful, Peter? Sonia in the Q&A, in sense of, this laudable ambition to make it more transparent as to who owns land and all the rest of it. Has that been meaningful and useful, or has that not really made much of a difference?
I mean, I think it hasn't really made much of a difference. I mean, we still continue with the sort of carrot and stick. I mean, it's always good if you can just agree a price and transact, and that's complicated enough in the local authority world.
Yeah.
But if you've got somebody that is digging in, or you've got multiples of people who are digging in, quite a lot of these people are very, very intelligent and can pay that out for a long time now. Phil hit the nail on the head before. You've got to have a long-term plan for these things, and you've got to be steady away. But political cycles mean that my promises and my political foundation is this stuff will get done in 36-month chunks, and if we're not taking big steps forward every 36 months, then I'm quite sure that Peter will be looking for a job elsewhere.
Yeah.
So progress needs to be rapid, and the CPO process currently just doesn't allow that to happen
because it's too long, too complicated, too drawn out.
It is, and really, there is a way through. I mean, we've got a tribunal. We should just be buying stuff, and then it all gets. If there's arguments, let's have the arguments down the line. These things can't be impediments to multi-billion-pound development that change the face of a place.
The weight of the public good element to the remove, either the realization of the opportunity and or removal of the blight, it should be given much more greater weight. That's a great thought as well. Phil, come in on this question around, all the places you're working in, issues around ownership, just being in control of the things that matter, land and buildings, significant. What could we do better?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 points to make on it. I think the first is, I'm going to say stating the obvious, because these things always boil down to the simple if you allow them to do. The first is obviously if when we're looking at a place, if the majority of the land's already in ownership, that removes one friction.
Yeah.
So, and it's the more friction you remove, obviously, the quicker you go, and that certainly helps the political cycle that Peter refers to. But life isn't as simple as that. So it isn't about saying we'll only work where the land's owned under majority ownership. And so that isn't the truth of it. It's then, in my experience, in terms of delivery, it's then ideally being able to work at as big a scale as possible, right? Because you can team and ladle there. So if you do have something that legitimately is expensive, but it might be, low density, a particular specific use that, in fairness to the owner, is expensive, but is just complete, or a unique use, but is in the way. It would be unfair, clearly, morally, to take that for a different price for a discount and say, well, on you be it. But if you're working at scale, you can team and ladle that across lower value land. So scale helps. It also helps from a point of view that we've used. I mean, again, I'm sat in a scheme where we worked with Salford Council, and it was a 40-acre, pretty much 40-acre CPO, or a CPO covering 40 acres. It wasn't 40 acres worth of land, but the red line covered 40 acres. And we did a mix of, we'd go to the speculators and say, well, look, if you want to develop, here's an agreement. You can develop, but sat alongside it is an option. So if you don't develop, and if you don't develop critically to this standard, we can acquire the land. So put your money where your mouth is, and you develop, and we'll work together. And actually, we will facilitate some of that by that piece of land next door. You need to unlock yours. We'll transfer it to you. That pretty quickly sorts a wheat from the chaff.
Yeah.
And then you've undermined their position then from an inquiry perspective. From a look, I think it would help if local authorities had more support from the devolved administrations and Homes England in use of CPO powers. I mean, I thought the letter from the Housing Minister to Peter Freeman the other day was really encouraging in terms of direction of travel.
Yeah.
But one thing that's pointed out in there is rarely used. I think the term, I think never might be the term.
Yeah.
CPO powers that the agency's got. And I understand why to date they haven't, because that would be imposing it in place. But I think place more than anything needs that backup. So greater use of that or intention to would certainly help remove some of the friction.
Brilliant, fantastic. Okay, let's move on. We'll try and get through this, at least talk a little bit about these different aspects. Let's move on to money, which is obviously central to all of this. And I think that, again, start with you, Kate. There's obviously more would be great, right? I mean, if we had more, we could, but I guess there's also the question about, the nature of it. Where is it best used? What type of money is, would be optimal to take forwards these sort of brownfield things. We've obviously got things like the Brownfield Land Release Fund, which is there. Is that kind of working? Should that be expanded or changed? Or just your thoughts on, the significance of the money aspect and how it plays into the overall scheme or schemes.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Peter made a good point earlier about borrowing, and over the last few years we have been able to progress a number of schemes on cheap borrowing. At the moment, I've got a couple of projects that are on the back burner because we just can't afford the borrowing now. It's up at sort of 6%. Hopefully by the back end of next year it might be back down to the levels that we can make those schemes viable again. But that's one of those things we don't have much control about. The different brownfield funds, the Brownfield Release Fund has been the one for public sector land. We don't own much land actually as a local authority. The land that we do own tends to be listed parks and gardens or pieces of land that no one wants, and there's usually a reason they don't want them, because they're undevelopable or they've got something wrong with them. The Homes England funding for housing, I have to say I am a bit frustrated about that. I think it's been very unclear how to access it. Homes England, I would say, over the last 2 years have probably withdrawn a little bit. And whilst they might be engaging with some bigger places like Sunderland, like Salford, for smaller towns, that they have basically said to us, you're not a priority for us. We're going to work with places that can deliver at massive scale,
right.
And you can have some affordable housing programme money. So it hasn't been very helpful. And I think, the bill funding, they've got a minimum of 150 units, which is actually small, but actually we've got sites that are smaller than that, a number of sites, and collectively they will deliver a decent number. And I think what is even more to the point is that we can deliver those much more quickly than a large site that will take years of assembling and planning. So I think if the government are wanting to deliver housing numbers quickly, there's probably some low-hanging fruit that funding can go for and deliver houses within this parliament.
Brilliant. That's a great point on, you might have several sites that aggregate to more than 150, but not one site that can deliver the 150, and thinking about that as a multi-site scheme rather than just a single site scheme. I think, there's more flex, particularly as you get down into, as you said, into smaller places where, 150 is still quite a big number. Peter, come in on this. I mean, you talked a little bit about, the cost of capital, the cost of debt, increasing materials, viability questions, etc. They'll then get shifted because of all of that, whereas, end prices stay fairly constant. What's your thoughts on, the nature of the money question and where government might helpfully and usefully support?
a little bit of a tweak to the rules, I suppose. I mean, to date, our sort of cash profile into Riverside, for example, is about sort of 30-30-30. So, the local authority is effectively principally borrowed and invested about 30% of the capital that is in the scheme. We've managed to raise through central government and people like Homes England about 30%. And the other 30%, there or thereabouts, is from private sector investors, including sort of pension funds. So, we to date have had quite a sort of well-balanced opportunity across there. But what we're finding now is really that the public sector, whereas I did believe shortly before the Liz Truss budget, we were going to sort of step away from having to be the principal investor and, we'd get in traction with the market. We are going to have to, if we're going to keep momentum going, we are going to have to step in as the public sector.
Yeah.
To step in as the public sector, the tweak that we need to see is a lot of these funds are obsessed with what is under the ground and making ground, developable, which has to happen. It absolutely has to happen. But a lot of the issues now are structural and they're above ground. They're a desire for good design, and why wouldn't you want that? And they're also cost against value. And really, we're struggling to have those conversations. We need to expand that funding envelope to capture those opportunities. And of course, and I'm sure no one would disagree with this one, in parallel to that, we need to declutter the approval process and management and governance processes around funding, because they're a total industry.
Yeah, no, great. That's a great point. And that talks a little bit to your I think one of the first things you said, Kate, at the start, which is you were able to use essentially non-ring fence money that you'd had, historically, to then deploy it to do the Upland scheme, even though when you got it, the Upland scheme didn't really exist, but because there was no ring fencing, you could use it flexibly as conditions change in your patch. And we don't do that often, right? Pots of money come with lots of constraints and limitations around them as well. That's a very good point. Phil, come in on this one around, you're coming in almost from the other end. What are you looking for from the public purse, as it were, when you're thinking about doing development?
I guess there are two aspects to finance. The first is the finance available for viable schemes, and that's easy. The kind of hackneyed phrase "wall of money" is accurate. Once you got something viable, the money will come. So the focus is always on, right, how do we unlock? And I think to that end, and I think you will find many people in both Homes England and the devolved administrations, I think to that end it has been too much of, exclusively pot A, pot B, pot C, pot D, and with the absence of affordable housing grant, the others can't talk to one another. So to Peter's point, you can have money to get you to get the ground ready, but you can't have anything for what happens above it. Well, that's not kind of reality in a lot of places. You've got the challenges are twofold, not the solutions aren't just under the ground. So I think this is being hinted at by the government at the moment. The frustration being, of course, that unusually for an incoming government, a new budget is usually a month or so after arrival. We're 3 months, so we've got effectively a pause, and then there's the challenge, I guess, of what's going to come from a budget that can be committed now and ahead of a CSR in spring. So it feels like there's going to be an element of treading water that will continue beyond where we are now. But what I'd be stressing is flexibility. To Kate's point, which you just picked up, Andrew. In the old days, and there's nothing new under the sun in regeneration. These things come round and round and round. You went to the RDA in NWDA was the one when I was on the tools I engaged with predominantly, and you took the project and they allocated from the pots. So it would be a mix of ERDF, single program, a bit of something else, but it was effectively a one-stop shop with a relatively light touch application process. You did have the economic stuff to attach, but it wasn't reams and reams and reams of stuff, and it wasn't always in very strict bidding rounds. Elements of it were ERDF predominantly, but
Yeah.
that made life easy. At the moment, and I've articulated this to colleagues in Homes England, Homes England particularly is set up like a department store, and I want Amazon. So the department store, I have to go from desk to desk to desk, and if the one thing I might need over there, but I also need from this desk, I can't. If I can't get that, I'm stuck. Whereas if I go to Amazon, I can just one size fits all. I just say what I want. It comes up, I buy it, off I go. And that's how the funding regime needs to work. There needs to be flexibility, and it needs to allow places to staircase. And what do I mean by that is, again, this old idea that if you stick a blue plaque in the reception of a building that said funded by, we've solved the local issues.
Yeah.
It needs scheme after scheme after scheme, and a recognition that it will take 3 to 4 to 5 phases to address the structural problems in the location around levels of rents and house prices and mix of tenures. It doesn't happen in one phase.
Yeah.
But the funding programs assume largely that it will.
Brilliant. That's a great point. That's a great point as well. Yes, remembering that we don't have to have everything at once, but we need to think about one thing leading on to the next, and the funding programs need to do that rather than essentially get you to point one, but actually there's no thought about actually getting to point two when the real benefits or the significant benefits might kick in. That's a great point. Let's move a little bit, get your thoughts. Maybe you come in on first on this one, Phil, on the sort of skills and capacity sort of question, because I'd be interested, Kate and Peter, I think in some respects you're exceptions to the rule that there is capacity and skills in your local authorities, and maybe there in others there aren't. So, but also I suppose, Phil, some of these, some of what we're talking about is by definition, you can't get away from it, complicated, and you need a degree of knowledge and expertise and experience in certain things, whether it's on the financing side or whether it's on delivery structures side or whether it's on land acquisition sides, etc., which, understandably is not necessarily going to reside in every local authority, and probably nor should it. So how do we think about, providing extra capacity into the system? Is it to say, Homes England or the UK Infrastructure Bank should almost become sort of roving expert teams that go in and work with places to lend that capacity in to get things underway or to get things moving? I mean, what's your thought on that, Phil?
I think the first thing I'd say is, and I'm asked this question often, given the amount we work with local authorities, and I always start with saying it's unfair just to look in the direction of the public sector, because actually it is becoming increasingly difficult to get the skill set of what to deliver what is becoming increasingly complex.
Right.
Regeneration. So it's not a public sector issue in its own right, but it is true that it's more acute in the public sector quite clearly, for financially predominantly. If you've got children's services or regeneration, then you understand where the priority is going to be. But let's not just assume that the private sector is a wealth of skill set, and it's not as black and white as that. But yes, I think the reality is we're not going to see a flood of resource going back into authorities to allow them to hire the people that I've already said aren't probably there. Yeah. So it needs to be a more proactive approach from national and I think probably there's a bigger place for combined authorities in this. Right. So Homes England do already do what you described, right, but it is very much in the line of what Kate just described earlier. So it's not my place to say whether it's to the exclusion of one place over another, but they will put capacity into a place to help take things forward. But again, that will be limited. I think in terms of devolution, it's all about putting the power and the knowledge and the delivery closer to where it needs to happen. So for me, it's probably more around a CA working with its constituent authorities to say, where are the priorities? And rather than you having to hire people in, we will help, but we will deliver it together.
Yeah.
Because again, you can't go and impose something, and a CA can't impose something on an authority, and neither can the private sector. But if it can be drawn in capacity of a defined project, I would put more in that place. But clearly, there needs to be funding to allow that to happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kate, come in on this. The sort of question about capacity. Where do we? How might we engender more of it in the system on the assumption that there isn't going to be a resource for every place to boost their own capacity, from where it is to where it might need to be. How do we pool some of that? How do we do that?
I mean, there's not a magic wand, is there, for this? I mean, the fact is that there's just not enough people out there to do the jobs in either the public or the private sector.
Yeah.
And I think we as an industry, we need to start investing in training people and bringing people back in the system. I think if you go back to the late noughties and the 2008 crash, a lot of people were pushed out of the industry. Neither the private sector or the public sector recruited surveyors, planners, and trained them for years, and we're now feeling that and it has an impact in terms of the cost of those people as well. So we're not going to turn that round overnight, but I think it's something that the industry as a whole does need to work on. In terms of the capacity for us, I think as a small-sized authority where we have a lot of capacity, where we probably lack skills is around specialist skills, specialist surveying skills, and so on. And I think that's why we've always taken the approach of doing things with a development partner, with a private sector partner, because they bring skills that we can't. And I think they bring a certain savviness about how to build things in a sensible way, in a practical way, as opposed to what an architect thinks is a good idea. And it's blending those skills together so that you actually end up with something that is buildable and it's more viable. So that I think it's about that collaboration between those different sectors. And if I could just pick up on something Phil said earlier about funding, and it goes back to the days of the development agencies, and they came as a partner. They didn't come as a funder. They came to the table as a partner, helping you to deliver, your objectives. And sometimes they brought skill to that table. Sometimes they brought money to that table. But it wasn't an application form.
Yeah.
Put it through the sausage machine and we'll see what comes out. It was that long-term partnership in place that really made that work.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, Peter. Final thought on this kind of question around capacity skill. We've got a question as to if people were in the system before, where have they all gone? Why have they disappeared? I mean, that's maybe I don't know, maybe they've gone to do other things. But just your thought on how we might get more capacity in, or how we might better deploy existing capacity.
Sure, I think it's about local circumstances. I mean, the northeast of England's only got 2 million people in it, but it's got sort of 7 local authorities and a combined authority. So you're sort of spreading the skill set quite thinly if you try to drop them into every authority. I mean, I'm really, really lucky because I've got some incredibly sort of skilled people around me, and I hope to stay for a little while until we get the job done. But I can absolutely see that other local authorities, will speak to what Phil was saying about needing these sort of roaming experts to just sort of lend a hand at peak times, or where there's specialist kit that needs to come out of the ground. So I can see that happening. I think in terms of our circumstances, what we're seeing is that, people are getting on a bit. I mean, I'm no spring chicken. I used to be the sort of young disruptor. I'm sort of Uncle Arthur or whatever they want to call me now. But so I think what we've got to do is we've got to put a lot of effort into. When I first started in sort of quasi-local authority type scenarios, there were these things called sort of career grids and career plans, and I think we need to get back to that. There's some very ambitious young people out there that could do a job for us if we just sort of put the effort in and pull them through the system and give them the training that they need. And that's not just in local authority. I think Phil's right. The private sector, as we say in the northeast, it's getting thinner and thinner, especially on the contracting side. I mean, we're investing heavily in a new college for sustainable construction skills to just try and sort of boost the workforce a bit. But I'm seeing it across a number of sectors now. It's not just in the sort of built skills, it's right across the UK. So I think investing in very, very structured approaches to getting those professionals supported so that, we sort of, when we venture off to do other things, those skills are still available to local authorities. I think
that is a great point. Raises, interesting questions around the role of the professional bodies in terms of providing people, within disciplines, but actually with skills and insights that transfer across some of the more traditional built environment traditions. But maybe that's a bigger conversation for another time when we've run out of time. We haven't been able to cover everything, but I think we've covered a good amount and picked up some of the aspects of it. And that's in part completely down to my fantastic panel, Kate, Phil, and Peter. Thank you very much for being with us today, you three, and thank you all for your questions and for tuning in. If you want to go back, you can listen and watch the event on our YouTube channel as well. But until the next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Kate, Phil, and Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.